Welcome, everyone, to the Transparent VC podcast by Tribe Global Ventures. What do we talk about today?
This week, we chat about some of the news coming out of the US around the court case in the Sam Bankman-Fried. Oh, I totally fucked that up.
Sam, for a start, I think it's Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, I did. As I said it, I'm like, fuck, I've got to fix that.
You've made me rather hungry now that I think about it. He may end up in the death penalty. I'm not sure. We shouldn't joke about those things. But yeah, we talked about Canva and their AI fund, their AI growth, the $2.7 billion in revenue they've hit. What else we talk about, Jack?
We discussed one of Canva's investors, Airtree, achieving 100 investments, and discussed some of the data they've released on the performance of their fund.
And then we spoke about the merger of a couple of their portfolio companies together. So Mr Yum and Me&u coming together in some M&A activity.
Yeah, one of the articles had spoken about that 99% of startups fail. There's this view that startups fail because the product wasn't any good, but actually in a lot of scenarios, the failure actually came from a range of different factors, but one of them was around messaging, lead generations, and we often find good founders with good products that were able to raise money still not be successful because they couldn't communicate simply and effectively that got their customers to stand up and buy. And so we did a bit of a deep dive into that and shared some frameworks. Did we talk about anything else?
And we likely did.
Let's stop wasting everybody's time. Good.
They lost. They won, but only by 2 points.
Yeah.
It was mental. Portugal's never won a game in the World Cup, though. And they beat Fiji. Incredible.
Fiji was an absolute shoo-in, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the problem is, Fiji's got a really good starting team, but they don't have depth. And now their last game, it's shown. Yeah. Right. That was the heart rate this morning, 6 a.m. The heart rate's gone off.
Aaron's now joined us late. You can see that winter is back. I was going to mention it was 12 degrees this morning, and I notice you've got the new hoodie on, which I would love to feel and see and touch, but obviously I don't seem to be on the list.
You have to come by your place and drop it off. But yeah, it has been chilly. The weekend was chilly. I was feeling a bit this morning.
And windy.
How was your weekend? Dad's
taxi with the kids. So they had some kids over, and then Mia had a party to go to, and Cruz had some other stuff. Oh, Cruz had his first shift for his job, first ever job. So, yep, dish pig in a pizza emporium. So he loved it.
Nice.
Yeah. So all that sort of jazz. What about you guys?
I just had a quiet weekend.
You go, Jack.
Packed my bag and had a quiet one.
Yeah. Don, anything exciting?
Where are you going, Jack?
Oh, I'm going to France, yeah. Tomorrow night, I'm off.
Okay. To be young again.
It is going to be epic.
Yeah. I had my 4-year-old and soon-to-be 3-year-old's party, which was excellent. Had both sides of the family over, some relatives in from the UK, which is really exciting. Hired the jumping castle, which there'll be a few older people with some sore muscles for the next couple of days, I think. Got a little bit silly, and then had a great lunch with some family, and got a little bit of work done too in preparation for the offsite, which we're pretty well bang on 4 weeks away from now. So
yeah, 4 weeks. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the offsite.
Getting some of the content finalized around some of those scale frameworks, messaging, sales, strategy, structure, all that kind of jazz. So looking forward to it. Let's get into some news.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's been no shortage of stuff to talk about. We might just start with, it's a little bit outside of our world, but the FTX Sam Bankman-Fried trial of the year got away. And that's just been really interesting. With the prosecution has come in very quick, very big with the Jerry Wang testimony.
Yep.
Effectively saying, did you commit any crimes during the time? And Jerry said, yeah, and just rattled them off. These are all the crimes we committed. This is how we committed them. And yeah, it's going to be fascinating from a couple of points of view, just in terms of the sheer scale. But we always just seem to have these lessons around if something seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. And when the whole crypto market was falling down, Yet there was this one firm with this one kid that seemed to have Washington under their thumb and was constantly spending money to bail other people out and investing in all sorts of things that it's nobody ever asks or seems to ask, like, where did the money come from? Because it's not possible based on his spending patterns to have actually created dividends that quickly. So therefore, the only place it could have come from was operating cash. And in a scale-up phase, you are growing so rapidly that then the only place I believed it was coming from was customer deposits. And we've seen it recently in an Australian company where the founder's buying $20 and $30 million properties in Sydney and only burst onto the scene 4 or 5 years ago. It doesn't actually make sense to have that level of personal consumption.
Yeah.
And such a new story. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, but it's, so true. And there seems to be the pattern that plays out, right? So that's these founders start having this success, well, the indications of success. And next thing you know it, they're at dinners with politicians, which then to external people adds this credibility, which then becomes this flywheel effect of attracting more capital in or more customers, whatever else. But meanwhile, the fundamentals aren't actually true, like that, or they're not what they appear to be. And so in this case, like huge sums, $10 billion.
They said the defense is pretty well going to rest on, I think somewhere in one of the articles was, could you could there be an honest, and yeah, I'm not sure how well that sits. And it's the entrepreneurial curse, right? The style, the mindset, the view of the world is all about running quickly, low flexibility, low control, rule breaking. And that's required in order to change the world and get something new off the ground, that irrational exuberance. But it's those exact same traits that can allow them to start reading their own press, start believing everything that's said, and then hubris sets in. And then in order to keep the movie going, there are these little decision points of they could choose a harder path of disappointment through accepting reality and honesty. But then if I just hide this thing, or if I just change this thing, or I'll fix that up tomorrow, kicking the can down. And then what happens is it snowballs. They never intended for it to get as big as it did, but the universe takes over. And
that high entrepreneurial energy that tends to be low A in administration and record keeping and all those sorts of things. And before they know it, they get themselves in trouble. But it does beg the question, where was the governance here from others, investors or whoever else that came in, and the board and presumably all these things? How did such a sizable failure happen without those checks and balances that are needed?
Even I've learned through some of our portfolio and then interacting with some of the big VCs, we've got to remember that a lot of this was during the COVID boom time, where it was just this rush to get deals done and FOMO, and people didn't want to be left behind. And so they were willing to invest to just be on the train without some of those governance requirements. But even on some of our portfolio interacting with other investors, I must admit I'd assumed that much bigger investors did a lot more around governance and checking, but often they're either that big or that busy with such a big portfolio. I must admit I've been surprised that it isn't maybe as detailed, and just to get a deal done, they will allow certain things to occur. And in some situations you feel like, not an idiot, but we're pushing for this, we're pushing for certain things to happen, we're pushing for some good practices, but you almost feel a bit self-conscious as the only person seemingly pushing for those kinds of things. Why aren't others? And it's not about trying to create a straitjacket, and it's not about trying to control the world. But when you've seen certain patterns play out before, you just know certain things lead to other things. And that's why it's important to make sure that there's some governance and some, what's the saying, inspect what you expect.
That's been really interesting for me, to see that. And I guess just naively assuming that the bigger players with more staff, more headcount, more resources would be quite deeply across what's happening in their portfolio. But I'm finding an inverse relationship, if anything.
I think the trick for us is to make sure that we are able to scale ourselves in a healthy manner by ensuring that we always take our own medicine and not get lost on those things. And VC is a power law game, and we've got to be careful not to think that certain interventions are going to make everybody a unicorn, which is just not right. But there are some missiles that a guided missile going in the direction that it intends with a strong guidance system is very different to an unguided missile that sort of flames out and explodes somewhere. And constantly doing the best we can to do that. But here, it's alleged, and we'll have to see with the trial, here wasn't just a little bit of irrational exuberance and entrepreneurial energy. They went and amended the code base to put special privileges in that as FTX and Alameda grew, they weren't liquidated. They just had this unlimited ability to just keep sucking in more and more capital, and that capital came from customer deposits until they ran out of that capital. So it's not just, I made a decision or spent a little bit of extra money, or no, they actually modified the code base, allegedly. And if proved true, that's stepping over so many boundaries. It's not funny.
Yeah. And making an exception for Alameda Research to break the rules of the very rules they had in place for all their other clients and customers, and just exposing them massively they were doing $1 billion a week in trades, just that one entity, and just introduced a huge risk to their model. And then, the comment in court that, yes, we lied about these things. So it's going to be one to watch. I can't help but hear Sam's name and think of Buckman from the Silicon Valley series. And is it Buckman? Buckman? I just always have had that in my head since first hearing about SBF. But look, I'm sure there's going to be more news to come, and likely some serious jail time. Well,
the US system is an interesting system, so let's see what happens. Let's come back to local and something positive and exciting. There was an article out on Canva's AI products powering their revenue to around about $2.7 billion Aussie. And as part of that, the article talked about launching a $200 million fund to pay users for their royalties and their content, especially around the AI tools that will be affecting that.
Yeah, really positive, and using AI as a tool in their business, which kind of touched on some other things we've been reading recently. But big jump even from March, a 21% increase in their annualized revenue since it was last reported in March, and really great to see, like, the Aussie tech company growing like this. I think for me, the interesting part is that, that fund and the management of the IP. I think a lot of artists and creatives are talking about the impact of AI on their intellectual property, and it's good to see the approach that Canva's taking with that as well.
It's interesting to see their approach to the fund, because the stuff we've been reading, regulation isn't up to date, and no one really knows right now. It's such a big grey area. So it's interesting to see their approach, having the fund, which is the first people to do this, which, while the copyright infringement, everything's up there with consent, it's really interesting to see how it's going to play out.
Scott Galloway from Pivot has been talking about in a number of episodes how the writers and actors went on strike targeting the companies like Disney and Netflix. But his point is that those are dying industries in some respects. You should be going after big tech that is using AI to crawl all of your intellectual property to then create new content based on your intellectual property. That new content is not subject to intellectual property laws. I think the last 5 episodes, he's been talking about stop trying to get a 5% pay increase out of Disney. Go after the billions of dollars of value. He made the point that when Microsoft announced that they were implementing AI tools throughout their whole suite, that the market cap of Microsoft, I think, went up in a couple of trading days more than the market cap of Disney and Netflix combined. And so he's saying you're going after the wrong fish. You're just going after the little minnows. Go after the big entities.
It's interesting. There's a lot of commentary on the film industry, and some actors saying it's the death of the industry, death of the sector. And I agree with that point of view you were just describing. It's you can keep attempting to lock in old contracts and pay increases and everything else. But fundamentally, technology has shifted the landscape. And yeah, it sounded like my mum, talking to my mum. It's like you need to change with the times, right? So I think there is a huge opportunity there. But yeah, for someone like the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild, particularly in those industries, navigating that, and that's their role too, but navigating that's going to be challenging. But I think Canva here presents a model that is quite interesting and unique. And it'll be interesting to see what other tech companies introduce anything similar, like if this becomes a model for others to adopt.
Yeah. Jack, you've shared before a perspective on Canva and where you think some long-term challenges lie.
I would be worried if I was Canva with AI coming in, because Adobe, like what I said, I don't actually know how they see themselves as competitors, but AI is going to allow the average punter to become more of a graphic designer. Like, you don't even need to learn the skills of Canva if you've got AI. To me, it seems like
you just tell it what it wants.
Yeah, because like Canva's whole thing was you don't need the graphic designer anymore. Like, you can use our templates, but then AI is gonna really wipe the need for that out if it does what it says it's gonna do.
Yeah, if it keeps that momentum, people will just be able to, in natural language, describe what they want. And if it comes back not quite what they want, no, I meant this, no, I meant that, change this, change that, and that natural language approach. And I guess because it's, when you look at Canva's user base, a lot of it is people for internal presentations or social media requirements. It's not that it's non-professional is not the right word, but it's for a particular business case rather than some high-end.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's an interesting time.
It's the evolution of the world, having to constantly deal with change.
Yeah, that's true. I do have some of the comments Cliff was saying. They want to consolidate down. Given the macroeconomic times, companies are looking to consolidate down into one platform. So Canva's having to try and build out to be that one platform.
Yeah, and for me, they wouldn't have been able to do that unless they really owned their niche and they started really tight with the product that they started with originally. And then they got momentum, they got investors, they got cash flow, and that's what's given them the right and the ability to go and start to go broader.
Great.
It's the same sort of experience of, say, a Google owned search and then started bolting on all of these things. So there's a repetitive lesson here for entrepreneurs that the ultimate vision may be quite wide and quite broad in terms of functionality, features, markets, and products. But you've actually got to start really niche, really pointy, and then build up momentum. Whereas often what they want to try and do is start wide. We can do this, we can do that. We're going to do this and do that and do this and do that. And they don't get the momentum and the critical mass to pull all that off. And unfortunately, none of it works.
Yeah, great. Mark, remember the offside? I remember Mark said, start as a niche, scale as a generalist later on, did the curve. And it makes so much sense. Like, every company, you can pretty much recite how they did it. eBay sold Benny Kids, then scaled to a generalist marketplace. Like, everyone does it like that does it well.
Amazon, not everyone. All the successful people do it like that.
Yeah.
And companies that often haven't achieved the success they could have achieved was because they decided to take a different path. We're different, we're special. We've got 5 different markets that we can simultaneously go after it early on. We've got 3 different products. We've got multiple problem solutions, and they end up getting themselves into trouble.
Yeah, it's a shame. I like Adrian's description, the shotgun approach. Like, that sits well with me. Like, simple, easy to recite.
And to be fair on founders, sometimes in the really early phase, there is the ready, fire, then aim sort of shotgun, because sometimes you don't know exactly where it's going to stick. And so you do have to test some markets and you do have to test who's getting the most value. But that's often something that's really early. And then during that initial phase of growth, you actually really have to go focus. So it's almost like an accordion. You got to go out a little bit when you first start, then back in really focused, then out as you scale.
Yeah, look, I don't know much about the space, but from the outside, like, between Canva, Figma, and Adobe, they're all fighting for similar customers. And AI is only going to enable people that haven't learnt the skills to use the platform become everyday users. So to me, it's an A arms race. But yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see, because my view is Canva enabled the average person to use a platform without having to go through a graphic designer. But now when you implement AI, you don't even need the templates that Canva uses, because you can use these models through description. So it's a super interesting time, and it's going to see who can leverage the AI tools the most to get the other population that currently aren't using these platforms.
The AI arms race. I love that, Jack.
Yeah, I think there's an article on that.
It's very true of that.
Get to the AI chopper. And I think that's right. With a lot of the tools and tech that we're seeing, it's how do you get them in a natural language state where your average person in their own words, in their own language, just start typing. I need this picture changed in this manner. But I meant this. No, change that top left bit. I really want that as a different color. And in last week's episode, we talked about how AI was allowing interaction between human and the AI, almost like a coach or a buddy. This is where these tools are heading. And I guess user base, it's probably not the high-end Photoshop gurus that are creating high-end graphics. It's become people looking to do presentations or social media content or posts. It's very much that less technically trained, sophisticated group. And so the more you can get people able to interact with just natural language and just describing what they want to a machine, I think that's the way the world's going to head. And that is going to be a function of who's got the capital base, who can attract the talent. And it comes back to a repetitive theme that you hear on this podcast, that money is good, product market fit is good, having a good product today is good, but long-term success actually comes from managing the change loop and accepting that change, technological change, environmental change, demographic change, technology change, whatever that change might be. COVID in itself was just one big series of changes thrown upon us. Those changes create problems that you've got to deal with and opportunities that you've got to capitalize on, and you've got to manage that. And whoever can manage that loop of, okay, a change has happened, here's the problem, here's the opportunity, I'm going to manage that. Whoever can do that fastest on a repetitive basis are the companies that win. So it's the company culture. Yes, money is nice, but money can sometimes actually cause problems because it allows you to suddenly just go after more and more resources, which is harder and harder to manage. You lose your ability to be resourceful at some point, sometimes when you've got too much abundance of resources. And so it's that culture that's going to win. Now, there are some companies that have demonstrated an ability to traverse that change loop with a really strong culture for decades at a time. Some haven't, so it'll be interesting to see where that comes. And ultimately, where the challenge comes with managing that change loop is that at each problem or opportunity that you get hit with, you've got to decide what to do, and then you've got to go and implement it. And decisions sometimes can be easy, but sometimes they can be hard because different people's styles, self-interests, perceptions, values, how they see the world. And so if you're in a team of people, whether it's 2 people or 200 people, if there's a lot of conflict between those points, styles, values, perceptions, interests, and we don't have the trust and respect in each other to traverse that, it just makes it really difficult. And so for me, I always come back to how do you analyze the culture? How do you support that culture and just understand that it's never the product or service that's best that often wins. It's things like our culture had really strong trust and respect that allowed us to traverse all of the inevitable conflicts. So that way we could make great decisions and implement them. And we had to do that because there were just always these problems and new opportunities thrown up by change. And companies that can do that are the ones that are going to win.
Yeah, and I feel like that rate of extrinsic change, like change happening externally in the economy and in technology, is just forever accelerating.
Exponential. Well, it's accelerating, and it's accelerating because of the interdependence that everything creates. 100 years ago, when you grew your own food and made your own clothes and you made one big life decision every decade, there just wasn't the interdependence. Now we're interdependent on the internet and technology and tools and other people and resources. And if any one of those things changes or breaks, it just affects everything else. And therefore that rate of change becomes exponential because we are so interconnected. So the more interconnected we become, the more reliant we become on so many different things, the more you've just got to expect more change, which means you've got to expect more problems, which means you've got to expect more decisions you've got to make, which means you've got to expect a lot more conflict. And it's only those that have got deep trust and respect that are going to survive that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder about the people aspect of business. And this article is talking about the growth in revenue attributed to AI. But one thing that was an interesting topic for us this week was even within product-led growth companies, they still have high headcounts in sales teams. Like there's still humans driving that growth. And Jack, I know we talked about this during the week, and there was a chart. I don't know if you're able to pull the chart up, Don, of some of the product-led growth companies and the size of their sales teams. But for me, it was like, oh yeah, I haven't actually thought about that too much, and actually seeing the numbers was really interesting.
Please stand by. I thought I had the picture ready to go, but Mr. Competent here does not have it ready to go. Okay, it should be coming up shortly.
Yeah,
anything
great.
there yet?
Yep.
Yeah. So for those listening at home, what this is showing is that companies like Canva, Slack, Shopify, Atlassian, these have been some of the poster children for the product-led growth movement. And what it means, I think, is that some founders think that their product should just be developed such that it sells itself, it just walks off the internet. But actually what we find is that the most successful companies that still invest highly in product-led growth still have some fairly significant sales teams. Like Shopify has 2,610 people in sales and business development based on LinkedIn data from May 2023. Atlassian, 2,166. Datadog, 1,443. Slack, 913. And then it goes down. Canva has 316 people in sales and business development. And so I think it's really important that it's actually, like most things in life, it's a partnership. It's both product-led investment, product-led growth investment, supported by sales, and vice versa, and creating that flywheel.
Yeah, it's interesting when founders talk about switching to a product-led growth strategy. And I've heard them say a few times, we'll be able to reduce sales team numbers, and it's almost an assumption that these things go almost like an autopilot. But this was really interesting to see, especially Shopify, like something that I see as very plug-in driven, established marketplaces and very high headcount in the sales team. So yeah, good reminder that came up during the week.
While we're on the topic, another decision that early stage founders have to make early on is whether or not to start targeting a niche or being a generalist. Don, I know we've had a chat earlier or late last week about this. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it comes from the Canva article. Jack, does it not? Where what does, just remind me what Cliff says?
They're trying to consolidate into being the all-in-one platform. And he references being the economic turmoil. People are looking to consolidate their tech tools. But we were chatting about how they're in the position now to be the all-in-one. They had to start off really focused and then widened out.
Yeah, there's no shortage of constant case studies that success we see time and time again actually starts with a niche. And our deep dive today is going to go into messaging and just some of the patterns we see there. But Canva started as a particular tool for a particular type of people looking to create a particular kind of graphic. And they were able to raise capital and get some really incredible momentum that now they're talking about adding on other tools that sort of smell a bit like Microsoft Office and Google to try and create that ecosystem that sort of locks people in. Just like Google started off in search and they owned that, and then they started to go wide. Amazon in books. And the constant challenge is around how do you find that market early? Sometimes you've got to do some testing on different markets, different problems, different products, different customers. But where we see, whether it's in our portfolio or any of the investments or just in the wide world, those that went really niche and were able to defend against that entrepreneurial energy of I can be all things to all people, those that actually went niche were rewarded with the momentum.
Mm. Yeah, focus.
The momentum to then go and do other things and to lay out their vision. So it's a really valid point. And I don't think it would just be us that see it. I see it a lot of content coming out from other VCs as well. And one of Canva's early investors was Airtree. And Airtree, there was an article just out in the Australian how they've reached 100 investments, which is no easy feat.
No, huge milestone, 100 investments. Yeah, so the article by David Swan interviewed the founders, James and Jackie. The partners. Yes, you're right. But yeah, it was interesting seeing for me the stats. So the fact that 82 of the companies are still active, 15 have exited, and only 3 have closed, which I feel is quite impressive in a portfolio of 100 to have only 3 closed to date. But it is that reminder that, yes, there's a lot that hasn't paid off in there, but the portfolio theory and the power law of VC, where we anticipate that the majority are not going to return capital, and we will have the couple of outliers and hopefully that one that essentially returns the returns of the others and above and beyond. It's going to be fun to watch Airtree's portfolio over the next 10 years and see not only how they grow the base from 100 upwards, but how that 100 actually ends up playing out and where they all end up. But huge credit to them. Well done. 100 in the portfolio.
Yeah, and it's good to see some balance in the reporting here because Jack's got absolutely pillared for the milk run scenario. But when you look at what VC is there to do and how it backs companies, and it is a power law game that you have to be investing to try and hit the ball out of the park. And sometimes the conditions just don't suit that. And in hindsight, people say, oh, I always knew that would have been the case. And what a terrible investment. Actually, no, it doesn't work like that. And so here, Airtree clearly have been extremely good at keeping clearly their decision-making process finds a way to, I guess, over-index in companies that have the conditions that buy them a ticket to success and filter out companies that are dead set have no chance because those stats are very good.
Yeah, and averaging 2 unicorns per fund.
Yeah,
like that's impressive. They've returned 3.3 times cash to investors from the first fund, and yeah, it's overall very impressive. I didn't know their numbers until reading the article,
and I think it's the flywheel effect of a whole lot of things. You develop a brand, which means you get to attract the best founders. You get to have the best deal flow. You can then invest in the resources to support those founders. It's building a VC or an investment firm is no different to the founders we invest in. It's about developing all of those different aspects of the flywheel, and these results demonstrate why they are one of Australia's top performing VCs. So all credit to them.
And Jack, was it you that found that quote from James Cameron in the separate article?
Yeah, it's an older article, and I wrote it down after. I really liked it. And he said, the best advice I got from my first boss in VC was never try to outrun the power law. And it really resonated with me. And he went on to say, our job as a VC is to find exceptional people who have the potential to build very large companies. When we do our job really well, a small number of our investments will become very large companies, and those companies will make up the vast majority of our returns. This is the power law in action, and as VCs, it rules everything we do. I thought that was a really concise way of putting exactly what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Don't outrun the power law. Yeah. Never try to outrun the power law, because it is something I hear said a lot, is if that's the success rate you have in portfolio approach, why don't you optimize for the other 7 that are failing? And the nature of the game that we are in and backing new innovations with early stage companies, often building new markets in states of very rapid market change as well, that you can't outrun the power law.
And one of the challenges, so that the first part of it, we back exceptional people. And sometimes we see an idea and we just don't see the team. We like the idea, but how do you filter that? And then part of the challenge is exceptional people is not just about when everything's going good, because it inevitably never does in early stage business. The challenge is you really don't know someone, their worldview, any of those things until you're in a conflicting situation, until you're in a situation where suddenly you do have style, perceptions, perspective, all of that coming in. It's very hard to actually really know whether you can traverse that situation. And clearly Airtree have obviously been able to do it, but I guess that's where the challenge comes, and trying to find the tools and frameworks to help you understand that. Because when entrepreneurs are pitching, and then even when we do due diligence and we're spending some time together, it's generally pretty rosy, right? Everything's pretty happy. It's until something happens and then you've got a different view of what should happen in response, or what we should do, or what the decision's going to be, or what the implementation has to be. That's where the rubber hits the road. And that's why we're always working out, how do you try and keep that alignment? And if you can, great. If you can't, you got to get on with it.
Those times of conflict or adversity, and equally times of huge success, like rapid success, tend to reveal those conflicts in styles, in approaches, in values, in everything else. The other element of this, like with Airtree for me, was another article that came out this week about the merger of two rival apps that were both backed by Airtree. So Mr Mum and Me&u merged last week.
Mr. what? I thought you said Mr. Mum. It's like I've read the wrong article.
Not sure what else you're reading, Don, for Mr. Mum. It's interesting, actually. For me, for my first reaction to this article, reading this, was like, maybe this is rare in Australia, but I feel like these types of mergers of companies within someone's portfolio, like within one investor's portfolio, I have seen this more so in the US, and it feels over here, I think it was reported as one of the first or something of this nature. So the article made a deal about the fact that this was two of Airtree's portfolio companies, and there were rival investors negotiating over a long period of time for this merger. To me, it feels like things like this are more common in the US. But yeah, what do we think? I think this is a great positive. I think it's a good sign of the ecosystem doing its thing.
I think it's a sign of a couple of things. One, that easy money to just go after growth is pretty well gone, because clearly two rivals here going after the same people, spending just wasn't going to fly. Then there's the question of, would I rather have a smaller piece of something bigger, or a larger piece of potentially, for one of them, nothing? Because with some of the margins and the way these things roll out, maybe there just wasn't room, considering that there are other options, that the point of sale companies are now bringing out their versions of this. So when you've got the point of sale, then it's coming down the value chain, there's going to be new competition coming as well. The article, I can't remember if it's this article or there was another article on it. The problem is that from a merger point of view, because it's almost so exactly the same, the synergies really are only around costs and back office. And that's always risky, putting any value on those items, because a merger done for just those reasons tends not to work. And then I was on a board with Stephen in another business when he founded Me&u, and great operator, very pragmatic, given he had started another business that he had exited. So he's certainly the definition of a serial entrepreneur, but very pragmatic. What does the future look like? And I wasn't surprised to see that someone like him would be part of a deal like this, because sometimes entrepreneurs get absolutely wedded to, it's my thing, I need to be at the top of it. There's a whole legacy that I'm trying to build here. Whereas some entrepreneurs, where it's not their first rodeo, it's actually about value creation. It's about the staff. It's about the customers, and what's the best path forward to achieve that. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah. And your point about two companies of similar size, these were both reportedly turning over or booking 28 mil Aussie dollars
net revenue,
in net revenue. And it's interesting. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in this deal negotiation. They ended up on a 55 to 45% split. And just reading through the article and its description, at least, of some of the tension between investors, I would have loved to have been part of this to understand how they arrived at that split in the end.
Yeah, it would have been. I was involved in a company I took over, probably 10 years prior. They had just gone through a merger of, I think it was 38 individual little entities having to financially consolidate into one. And when you've got Yeah, we then took over the post-merged entity that had many scars from the battles that came from trying to negotiate that equity. And in the end, unfortunately for everyone, that equity ended up being worth zero. But it's not easy because trying to normalize P&Ls, and we've got this initiative that's going to deliver us this outcome, and this is why we should be worth more. It would have been absolutely hats off to them. Would not have been an easy thing to pull off, and everybody would have had to have given some concessions. But coming back to some of the common themes, these things don't happen unless there's some level of trust and respect, and clearly they were able to maintain that in the journey. So absolutely hats off to them. But one of the articles around this merger, the headline of it was in the AFR, do 99% of startups really fail? And what they had put forward was actually the stats that have come in a post-COVID investment boom aren't showing that. But I think it's going to take a while for the zombie companies, so to speak, to come out. There are still some companies that are burning cash that are hoping to turn things around to raise money, that are alive today. But unfortunately, and I don't say this with any joy whatsoever, it's just the game that we're in, their prospects are actually quite low because they're just not in a competitive environment where shareholders and investors can get access to lots of deals. The good deals are getting the allocation of the majority of the capital. If you've raised 1, 2, or 3 times and you haven't yet been able to demonstrate your ability to produce the results that you need to produce, there's still a huge amount of those companies out there that are going to find it a challenge. And so at the moment, I think the stats probably show that maybe 99% don't fail, but in normal times, a high percentage do. And where the segue sort of is, often we find, especially in the B2B space, the product was good, or the product at least had a worthy cause. There were some people interested in it. The founders were competent in terms of being able to do a range of things, but they were just not able to communicate their message. They were just not able to message it properly, so that way customers understood what it was and why it was important to them. They just couldn't get that level of clarity that is required in a really busy world to cut through. So customers would go, I need to buy this right now.
Yeah, it's so true. I spent a bit of time with a founder last week, and they were talking about their frustrations with newly hired sales team that weren't producing outcomes and weren't being effective, and going through that loop of then wanting to fire that team and rehire another team. And when you actually brought it back to the fundamentals, their messaging, they just did not have clarity of messaging. It was really unclear. Who are you targeting? Who is your customer? What is the problem you are solving for them? Like these fundamentals that were murky as anything. And so they were trying to scale the machine and yet hadn't had these key elements actually sorted. And for the founder, we see it all the time, right? Like founder-driven sales, the founder's in the room, they've got that energy, they know the story, they can sell it. But then when they try and transition that and scale it, they haven't done that work to actually distill down their core messaging. And Don, you ran a session online workshop for the Tribe community and public. And in that session at the start, we kicked off with asking everyone what are their challenges. And there were lots of elements further down the sales process and systems. But when you brought it back to nailing your messaging, the consensus in the group was, we have work to do here.
Yeah, so I thought I'd share just some short bits from that session, and there'll be another one in November. If any of this stuff resonates for you, it's an online session that we do. Just go to the website and you'll find it there. But there's a few adages that are true in this world, like one of them, which comes from Donald Miller of StoryBrand, which I love as a framework. If you confuse, you lose. And it is so true that often because the founders are so passionate, they know all of their customers' problems generally better than the customer does. They know all the things their product can do, and they're so excited that they end up throwing so much information. It just becomes confusing for the person on the other side. And for me personally, I know there are a lot of conversations I've had with people where you can actually see their eyes start to glaze over after a while. Just listening to me, I just tire them out with all the different bits and pieces. And it's so logical to you, but the other person's brain hasn't been able to catch up yet. And so that's one of the areas that we see. And ultimately, the extension of if you confuse, you lose. The reality is that people will engage really in anything in life when they read or hear the words that resonate with their story. Again, this is another story brand thing. When people don't actually care about other people's stories as much as they care about their own. That's just the way where we've got this brain that's just constantly firing off, scanning the world for different things that are relevant to us. And that relevance often comes to my story, either the problems that I've got, the desires that I have, the goals that I'm seeking to achieve. And so when I'm looking into the market and different people are trying to sell me different things, my brain is scanning what's in it for me. Now, the problem is that on the other side, if you're constantly talking about your product, your journey, your story, your testimonials, all of these things, if you're doing that at the wrong time, before you've engaged the other person's story, why you understand their story, and being able to activate some of those things in their brain, they can't connect. And so that's why I really enjoy running the workshops for people for the offsite coming up. It's actually going to be a multi-day spending time together, and there'll be bulk time allocated to this, because so often we just see really great products and really great services, but it's just so confusing.
Yeah. And like one of the ways I love the work of Don Miller, like some of his content where he dissects websites and he dissects marketing collateral. And once you have that unlock of looking at most pages, and it's all about the company talking about, the generational family business ownership and all these, that's what they lead with. And ultimately, as a customer, I'm like,
they do that because they're trying to build trust. They're trying to build competence. And that is all required at a certain point in time. And that's where we've modified how we do pitch calls. And there's going to be a video release that we're open sourcing, where we're trying to make the pitch call far more of a conversation rather than throwing up all of this information, and helping us understand in a more cohesive journey what it is you do, why you do it, what's the problem that you solve, why should you be trusted, what's the unique domain expertise that you've got that led you to this journey. There's a sequencing of that. Otherwise, if entrepreneurs turn up and they just throw up all of this stuff, and us as investors, our own story is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to find power law businesses. We're trying to find great founders that can communicate really well, that can communicate simply, that can engage us. And we've got to make sure that we plow the field to allow that to happen, rather than just having really energetic founders just turn up and just spew for 20 minutes. Meanwhile, our brains have wandered off somewhere else. We're really trying to be a positive part of that conversation.
Yeah, the sequencing. And the other little bit that I take away from Don Miller in particular that stuck with me is just the mental calories, like that concept of every word, everything you do, everything you present has a certain calorie count attached to it. And sometimes some part of what a founder says or pitches has this high calorie content where my brain is having to go off on tangents and consume so much to try and find understanding. But the founders that win are those that can so simply convey that it's easily understandable on a low calorie mental consumption diet. And so there's a couple of golden nuggets in there for founders.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to say that again.
No, I was just saying, and we have to have some slides to go through it.
It's not a full chart, but we'll get there. So I just wanted to, this was from that session. So from those playing at home listening, where we always start, we're helping portfolio or anybody really get that real crystal clear message, because you need that. So then that way you can generate leads at scale, is that there's this pattern that we see out in the world and it's the power of 5 ones. When you have one market, and in the US, if you've got an American accent, you can say things like the riches are in the niches, right? It's the niching. If you have one market that has one ideal client profile, that has one problem, that you deliver one product or solution, and do that for at least one insert period of time here, it could be a year, could be a month, could be whatever. But it's one market, one ideal client profile, one problem, one product for one period of time. That's where we find the key to success is, because you can then build up some momentum. Now, you've got to make sure that is a big enough market. Sometimes we find that entrepreneurs have gone too niche and there just is no market there, or it's not big enough. But the question you're going to have to ask is, how much gravity are you going to try and ignore here? Because often we see a lot of founders at that early stage, pre-seed and seed. Oh, we service multiple markets and we've got multiple customers that have multiple problems and we've got multiple solutions. Now, Canva is now going multiple. Google went multiple a long time ago. Facebook is multiple. Amazon. But they didn't start out multiple. They started out with this one. Facebook was one kind of social media network for one kind of university type in one kind of area. And then if it had tried to be all things to all people globally, I don't believe they would have had anywhere near the success, but they were able to build that momentum. And so in getting that message, it becomes a lot easier if you can put a skewer through this. Then what we find, and for those playing at home, this is a 4-quadrant model. Some founders end up in products that are much easier than others. And you can call that luck, you can call that skill, it doesn't really matter. But there are some founders that are trying to bring products to market where actually there's lots of alternatives and that the customer could do nothing. They could do nothing. And it's very relationship driven. But then there are some founders that are developing products where you can't do nothing. You have to take action. And there's very few alternatives and it's quite commoditized. And so depending on where you are, imagine that there's a horizontal line. On the left-hand side, my product is such that customers can do nothing. There's lots of alternatives. I've got to have a deeply trusted relationship with them. All the way on the other side, my customers can't do nothing. They might choose a competitor, but they can't sit there doing nothing. There's very few alternatives. And actually, I've made a non-relationship basis. And where we want to be is as far to the right as possible. Then on the sort of vertical axis at the top, there are some products that are a very direct solution, very tangible outcomes. The need of the customer is accepted. And so if you're delivering a product that's just, you buy my product and I get you an outcome there and then, and it's tangible and you accept that you need it, that's a much easier world to live in than the bottom side where actually it's an indirect solution. If you buy my product and then do these things and spend a bit of time, the outcome might be this indirect thing over here. And I've got to educate my customers that there is in fact a need here. They're not aware there's a need. Like, that's a difficult world. And so what we want is top right, direct solutions, tangible outcomes, can't do nothing, very few alternatives. And what we don't want is bottom left, which is can do nothing. There's lots of alternatives. It's indirect and it's intangible. And so often before starting this messaging, even if it's the power of 5 ones, where I'm going to go after one market with one ideal client profile that has one problem that I'm going to deliver one product to, this next map is incredibly important, because if you go after a bottom left market, after people that can do nothing, there's lots of alternatives, lots of indirect solutions, it's very intangible, the need's not accepted, going niche is still going to cause you a problem. But if you can go top right, where I'm going to have one market, one product, one solution, all of that, with a very direct solution, with a very tangible outcome, where you can't do nothing and there's very few alternatives and it's non-relationship based, that's where we find. And so a lot of startups fail. So coming back to that Mr Yum and Me&u article talking about why do 99% of startups fail, we find a lot of companies, they do fail, but there was a product there. There was a need, there was a solution, but either they weren't able to get that message really clear, and that was because they were too bottom left, or they tried to go too wide, too quickly, too soon, and they diluted all of their resources, all of their time spent, and they just never got that critical intensity.
Yeah, such a powerful framework. And I always say something, every time you go through that content, there's always a reminder in there for me personally, of what I need to be doing as well. Because when you're in it, it's so hard to see it for yourself and apply these things to your own business. And that's why it really helps to go through these types of processes with others so you can get that perspective on your own messaging and how to articulate it and how to find those areas of focus.
Yeah, when you're in the painting, it's very hard to see the whole picture. And I think in last week's episode, we talked about we can help others. It's very difficult for us to help ourselves. So that's why we've got to make sure that we've got people helping us. And so that way we can help others is actually a big circle that you've got to be in. As long as you're all signed up and subscribed to the underlying framework. If you're not, then there's obviously a big challenge there. But that clarity of I've got my 5 ones, and look at a Canva. They're only in the last few months talking about going out wide. They may have been thinking about it from day one. Like Luke and Ian podcast, he had his vision, he had his roadmap, he had all of the different products that he wanted, but he didn't really communicate that a lot. He focused on getting their initial product out, and they then got capital, they got momentum. Now he's got the luxury of being able to go out wide. And so some companies think, oh, I'm at the $1 million ARR now, I'll start to go wider. Actually, what these companies like Canva and Safety Culture and others are demonstrating, it's 10, 100, $1 billion ARR, and they're just owning that market, and then they're going huge, a lot broader. And when you've got one product, one market, it means all of your messaging becomes simpler. Hey, what do? You know how this is a problem for people? Yeah. We provide this product that then achieves this outcome. Suddenly your one-liner becomes a hell of a lot easier. If you've got to do, what do you do? Not having complex. We do this and we do that. And it's really hard to explain. If I ask anybody, hey, what's the outcome you achieve? Oh, it's pretty complex. Wrong. That's it. That is a precursor to knowing where you're going to end up, and it's not going to be somewhere good.
Yeah. And the other one is, well, for this group, we do this, and for this group, we do this, and for this group, we do, and over here.
And then you end up with a website.
Every time there's an and.
Yeah, you end up with a website that's just a complicated soup of all these different messages and just shit everywhere.
Yeah, totally. I am really looking forward to diving into this more at the offsite. It is just, even though we're delivering it, I get so much value for us through going through these exercises too.
I learned so much. And the participants then get to learn off their peers, off the other founders that are in the room, other investors, because suddenly you're getting different perspectives. And again, when you're not in the painting, it's hard to see the whole picture. When you've got 15 or 20 other motivated founders or investors that have their own perspectives, helping you create and put together these things, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those are interested, there'll be other sessions there. Hopefully there's been some content here, but I think it's just important. Why do startups fail? And often it's not because of a lack of money or a lack of a good product. That is just what we see time and time again. They raised money, they got the money, and they had a good product that someone was willing to buy, but they just couldn't communicate clearly. They couldn't communicate simply. They were too complex. They were too creative. They were too cute, and they were too spread all over the shop and didn't have focus. And then they couldn't get momentum, which meant that they couldn't get investor support. So they couldn't get new rounds of capital, and they fell over. So before thinking a startup has failed just because the only reason it would fail is because it's a bad product, I don't have any stats on this, but I reckon that's the minority.
Yeah, it would be. The stats on startup failure never, in my view, dive deep enough to understand true causality. It would be really interesting to actually dissect and understand. Yeah, completely agree. And look, for those that are interested in the offside, want to dive into this for their own venture, definitely check that out via the website. And I'm sure Don will include the link in the show notes as usual.
Yeah, cool. All right. So what are you looking forward to the week ahead?
I think we know what Jack's looking forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm off for 2 weeks. So leaving on Tuesday night and then away for 2 weeks.
A 6'3" giant in an economy seat for 24 hours.
I've got an aisle seat this time, Don, so I can't complain.
Nice.
Oh, well done. Well, yeah, enjoy the rugby, Jack. I'm looking forward to this evening. I'm catching up. So Vicky Forrest, the Queensland Trade Commissioner, who's normally based in Silicon Valley, she's back in Brizzy. And so tonight there's an event, and I'll go and catch her. I haven't seen her for a while, so I'm actually
Awesome.
really looking forward to that. What about you, Don?
While you were talking, I just had to load my diary because I have no idea. This week, this week is a week of board meetings. Really exciting, actually. So a couple of my angel investments and a couple of portfolio board meetings as well. And then on the weekend, big shout out to Bades because it's going to be a shindig down on the Gold Coast. So I'm really looking forward to that. Got a leave pass and everything.
I'm really looking forward to that. Big fella having a big milestone birthday this week. Happy birthday, Bates. Looking forward to celebrating with you.
Yeah, Dad's gone wild. I've still got to be home by 10, but still. Not like Jack off to another country, but enjoy it. Don't let youth be wasted on the young man.
Just allow us to live vicariously, Jack.
Yeah. All right. Safe travels, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you next time.